Good evening, everybody. This is Wilderness Voice 71 coming back at you with another video. Tonight, we're going to talk some more about the Templar. And I know last night we talked about the fallen ones, and we're going to get back into that a little bit, but I'm trying to lay some different things out in different areas. So I want to get back into this, and I think I've laid a lot of groundwork about the fallen ones and demons and that, and we're going to go forward into the Tower of Babel. But tonight we're going to talk some more about the Templar. And there's a couple things I'm going to address here. What I'm going to primarily focus on tonight is, were the Templars pirates, or were pirates Templar? So we're going to get into that a little bit. And the other thing is, I'm going to go back to, did the Templar align themselves with the British family, the royal family? Were they aligned with the British crown? So, to understand this, we need to go back to what the Templar did. So, I believe when they were excavating underneath the Temple Mount, what they found was knowledge. Because when I pointed out before about the Rosslyn Chapel, about the two pillars of Jash and Boaz being in Rosslyn Chapel, and corn, I think there was corn as far as was the crown molding that was carved into Rosslyn Chapel, and corn was not in Europe until 1493. And so I think this is very interesting. When Rosslyn Chapel was built, I think 1441 or 42, I forget. But anyway, I thought that was very interesting. But let's go back, how the Templar were formed. So the Templar were formed, and they were formed under the auspice of Bernard de Clermont, who was a monk. He was a Cistercian monk. So, and what I find really interesting about this character, when I was reading up about him and that, is how the early churches had knowledge of Jewish mysticism. And this really surprised me. So, because the teachings that Bernard was way ahead of his time, very wise. Bernard de Clermont taught the Knights, which started with the 9 original Knights, taught the Knights things that come out of the Kabbalah. And this is really interesting. So a lot of the ways that the Templar believed, which keep in mind is aligned with Christianity, because I believe, and I've said in videos before, Christianity is just the fulfillment of Judaism. When we look to the roots of Christianity, and a lot of times in Western culture, we have kind of went way out left field sometimes with what we understand, but the first Christians were Jews, and the gospel was brought to the Goyim, the Gentile, by Yehuda, by Judah, by the Jews. They brought it to us. So Christianity is a fulfillment of Judaism, and I think that these early church fathers understood this. But anyway, Bernard de Clermont, he taught them a lot of things in Jewish mysticism and a lot of principles to their life. And this is really unique. And I think that what we're going to find, I think the story I'm going to lay out, why I keep hitting on the Templar, is something very unique. And a lot of times you've read all these books and all these conspiracy theories and all these things. Sometimes it's a little bit, the truth simpler, but a lot cooler, you know. Another thing I want to lay out there that I found out the other day, and I found it really interesting, because I always had a problem with the Pope and all this, because the King of France in 1307 arrested the Templar, raided their stronghold in France, and arrested them for heresy, and there was a list of charges of heresy, witchcraft, sexual perversions, homosexuality. There's all kinds of list of charges. Well, I saw something on YouTube about a week or so ago that said that found in the Vatican, in the archives, that the Pope and the cardinals and the powers that be in the Church of Rome back then had a trial on the Templar, and they were exonerated. And so I've looked it up in a few different sources, and all the sources are saying the same thing. So, and that makes sense, because I can never understand, because according to tradition, the ones who protect the Pope even to this day are the Swiss Guard. And the Swiss Guard are actually descendants of Templar, because remember when I said when the Templars split up, some of them went to Switzerland. So they made an oath, and their greatest gift would be to be martyred for Jesus Christ. And so part of their oath is that they would protect the church, and they would, and the Pope, being that he is the representative, according to the Church of Rome, representative of Jesus Christ on this earth, then they would be vowed to protect him as well. And I find that very interesting. I always had trouble understanding that connection. Well, it makes sense now that they had a trial and they were exonerated, but the King of France still wouldn't let them go. And this adds more credence to my assertion that Templars went into piracy. So I believe when they started, I think when they went down and they were housed in Jerusalem, and they started excavating the Temple Mount, I think that the church knew that there was knowledge and there was writings, there was things they were trying to get. And I think that was more important than any gold or silver or anything that they could find. Because a lot of people say, well, they were trying to find the Holy Grail, the cup Jesus drank out of the Last Supper, but it wouldn't be in the Temple Mount. It was controlled by the Sadducees, which were the Levites, and most of them denounced Jesus. And the Last Supper was done in the more than likely in the ghetto of the Essenes, and so that probably wouldn't have happened. And there's a lot of other things. People trying to say the Ark of the Covenant, and that could be. And there's some interesting things, because there were catacombs all underneath the Temple Mount, but I don't know. I think what they found was knowledge, because when I pointed out before, the pillars of Jachin and Boaz in Roslyn Chapel. In addition, the crown molding in Roslyn Chapel was corn. And I find this very interesting, because I think what they did, because remember in another video I pointed out that the king of Tyre, the Phoenicians, taught Israel how to sail. And they sailed. So Solomon, it was under Solomon that these ships were built, and they sailed all over. So Solomon would have access to charts and navigation, because the Phoenicians had Babylonian star charts, and we know that King Solomon was the wisest king ever, and he's one of the wisest men in the world. So it would be reasonable to assume, or make the assertion, that he had star charts, maps, and navigable systems. Furthermore, he was married. One of his wives was Pharaoh's daughter. Now, why does that come up? And I had someone comment on the video, one of the videos, they've never heard that about Israelites settling in Ireland. They knew about the Egyptians. And there's some credence to that, and I said that, but more than likely most of them came through Crete. Well, another thing that's popped up that I was reading, came across, it's been out for a few years now, I didn't know, but there's actually a map of North America in Egypt that's 5,000 years old, supposedly. But here's the thing. What makes that so interesting? What does the Egyptians have in common with the Israelites, other than Pharaoh's daughter being, when it comes to the navies or waterways or shipping? What do the Egyptians have one thing in common with Israelites when it comes to the waterways and boats and all that? And that is the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were also helped the Egyptians, which is kind of interesting, because the Phoenicians were like the merchant sailing ships of the world. And I've also uncovered, and I need to do some more research on it, but they found that there was some of the mummies during that time have cocaine in them, which would have came from South America. And also there was tobacco in Egypt, which tobacco at the time was only native in North America. So that's very interesting. So, but my point is, when the Templar were excavating those tombs, I think they found knowledge, because it was right after that, within the earliest accounts we have of Templar hitting the United States is 1362, with some stones that they found in Wisconsin. So that would indicate that they'd been there at that time or even sooner. And so I think that we see this all starting to explode, the Templar moving everywhere after 1307. So after 1307, the King of France arrests them, they disband, they move 3 different ways, and then all of a sudden from Scotland, we have reports in 1362 that they're going over there, and then Henry St. Clair, about 1398, is in Nova Scotia, and although a lot of history on the British side of the pond, so this was a myth, but yet the Mi'kmaq Indians of Nova Scotia, their oral traditions tell about the treaty they made with the Knights Templar and a man named St. Clair, who their national flag, their national Mi'kmaq flag is as a Templar cross symbol. So we see these connections. So did Templar become, some of them become pirates? Well, this is what's interesting. The Jolly Roger flag is a Jewish bone box. So in Jerusalem, or in Israel at that time, when someone died, a loved one died, they were put in a tomb, and in a year or so, when the body decayed, they went back in, collected the bones, put them in a bone box, and they would cross the two femur bones above the other bones and then lay the skull in the middle. This is the Jolly Roger. Uses the flag. So this was adopted by the Templar as one of their signs. So they basically, this is known to be in Templar use. So now imagine this. You have a group, an organization of people that's been disbanded. They've had property seized. The King of Portugal let some of them come there, and that's where they formed the Knights of Christ. Then he negotiated with the Pope, the next Pope, and was able to get their property back in Portugal and give them back to them. And they formed the Knights of Christ in Portugal. You have the Templar who went up to Scotland, and there was Robert of Bruce, which at the time was excommunicated by the church. So in that time period before they had trials and exonerated the Templar, they went up there. And then we had some of them that went east northeast into what is now Switzerland. So how do we know that they became pirates? Well, what's interesting about this is that the oldest pirates known in history are Phoenicians. So the same people that are merchant traders sailing the world, the actual piracy comes out of a Phoenician word. These sailing people, these were the leaders of sailing. It was them and the Minoans were the leaders in sailing all over the world. And so the oldest known pirates that we know of, the ones that committed acts of piracy, were Phoenicians. It wasn't called pirates back then, but so what's interesting is that that's when you had some of that, but there were no pirates until after 1307. So the first pirates were that we know of in the known world today were in the 1300s, and they were after the Templar were raided and disbanded by the church and the King of France, and they were sailing vessels that went into the Mediterranean. And what's interesting about this is because that whole Mediterranean area, North Africa, and those areas were big trading routes. So these pirates focused mostly on North Africa and those areas which were Muslim controlled. So they went back down there and they started robbing those vessels. You gotta keep in mind, for a Templar would not draw a sword unless it was malicide, kill evil. Well, what more than they would be going after Muslims who did not believe in Jesus Christ, and therefore they were not killing anybody, they were killing evil. So we have that going on. But what about my theory when I said, did the Templar align themselves with the British Crown? And this is where it gets very interesting, because as we move forward in history, the British we start exploring. So we had Christopher Columbus, who was a Knights of Christ, go to North America, and then we start having the British going over there, and the French into Canada. So you have all these people trying to explore and put their claims on the New World. So this starts happening right after Christopher Columbus. Well, and I'm moving forward a little bit of history, and I'll come back and backfill, but I want to make this point, because did they align themselves with the British Crown? Because what happened in history, so in the next 300-400 years, in that time period, Great Britain becomes a world superpower on the seas. They are controlling everything. This is where they get to the point where they hit the 1700s and 1800s. The sun never sets on the British Empire. How did they become such a great multitude of nations when you had England, France, and Spain were competing for the new world? How did they emerge as the world leader? Well, what's very interesting about this is that the crown, the British crown, had an agreement with pirates. So British ships were not attacked. It wasn't until later on, after the British signed a treaty with Spain and Great Britain started going after pirates, did pirates retaliate on Great Britain. But I believe that the Templar, who were pirates, who were also up in Scotland, who then the royal bloodline, the Davidic bloodline, and I think that they started figuring this out when they were underneath the temple excavating, that there was Israelites in the British Isles. And they may have known about Jeremiah taking a Judaic princess to Ireland. I think they aligned themselves because remember what I said, we had Edward III that all of a sudden in 1348 starts the Order of the Garter, which is the knighthood, which shield is the Templar shield. So, and I know there's one guy who wrote a book called Antichrist and a Cup of Tea, where he's trying to, he claims the same thing about the Davidic bloodline. His original book, I don't know if he's rewrote, I read his original book when it came out. The only thing is that he says that the Order of the Garter was a coven of witches. I haven't seen that anywhere. It makes more sense because of their cross and that it's Templar. And I haven't seen where he tries to make that assertion it's a coven of witches. I know there's this whole thing with the French bloodline, the Moravian bloodline, that's getting into other stuff. I try to stay very positive about things, and I'll get into some of that stuff later. I'm well versed in it, but it's you have to make some leaps and a lot of supposition to get to points. And I think the theory I'm putting out there is easier to connect the dots, and I think we can almost take history and back it up, because we do know it is a historical fact that there was a covenant between pirates and the crown. And why was this? Well, during the time of the British expansion, these pirates would disrupt Spanish galleons and French ships. And so as people were trying to get resources from the New World and they were trying to do trade around the world, you had pirates that were in the Caribbean. You had pirates that were from the Caribbean to the North Atlantic. You also had pirates in the Mediterranean that were controlling, basically, they were controlling the flow of goods and services. So if they were flying a Union Jack, which by the way, the Union Jack is the Covenant of Ephraim and Manasseh, very well known. But if you're flying the Union Jack going through, well, they would let you pass. If you're flying another flag, they would attack you. And so these pirates they had a basically agreement with the crown, like, hey, leave us alone, you can rob anybody you want. And in return, well, at that time they started colonizing North America, and pirates were free to port. They ported in, they would moor their boats in Massachusetts. They would moor them in Charleston, South Carolina. They were mooring their boats everywhere. Furthermore, they had an island off Haiti called Tortuga, which if you've ever ridden the Pirates of the Caribbean ride or watched the movie, that's what that movie's about. That's what the ride at Disney's about, is about Pirate Island. It's about the island in Tortuga where basically the pirates had their own city-state, and the British were very well aware of it and left them alone. So they could take back all their loot, and there were pirates on that island that owned sugar plantations. They had homes, they had banking, so there's ways for them to launder their money, make business deals. We had colonists, colonial businessmen that were actually in partnership with the pirates. We had the governor of Pennsylvania who was doing business with them. So these were recognized in the New World, and as far as Britain was concerned, these were they were businessmen. They're called privateers. They were notable businessmen and well respected until they signed the treaty in Spain. So these Templar were doing a service, again, aligning themselves to the Davidic line to perpetrate, to expand the kingdom of the rightful one to rule. So, and I think that's very interesting. But anyway, I wanted to put that out there tonight so you guys would kind of see that picture, because we're going to start building on this. And I'm going to come back and hit on Templar and the Davidic line of the crown and stuff every so often, because it's going to build to something. I think what you're going to see, that the greatest story ever, that one of the greatest historical stories that's ever happened, was how the Templar through the Freemasons moved in a concerted effort over hundreds and hundreds of years for one objective and one goal. And this is I think one of the coolest things that when we get into, I think the light bulb is going to go off. You go, wow, that's what they did it. Because every symbol that we see in nations and flags and stuff like that has a specific meaning, and it's a meaning that goes beyond, at the time, goes all the way back to biblical times or times before in Egypt. And we're going to get into some Egyptian stuff too. But anyway, I want to put that out there tonight. Once again, I hope that the mercy, love, and grace of the Lord Jesus Christ is upon you and in you and through you. I know I didn't talk much Bible tonight, but I just go over stuff that I read that I find interesting. And who knows, you might find it interesting, you might not. But if you're in trouble or in stress or distress, don't know what to do, please run to Jesus of Nazareth, because in him is the way, the truth, and the life. And all those who come to them, no one is ever ashamed in his sight, in his eyes, and his light. And if you're unsure about your salvation, or don't know if you die tonight where you will go, please get on your knees and pray to Jesus of Nazareth and ask him into your heart, and he will let the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, lead you to all truth. Y'all have a great night.